You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, the Spurs' regular season roster is set. Who will be in the opening night rotation? And takeaways from the preseason. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. It's been a little over a week since I last recorded an episode. The Spurs have concluded their preseason schedule where they went 5-0. But let's first begin with the latest news, which is the regular season roster being set for San Antonio. And there weren't too many surprises with the decisions that these team made. So on Saturday, the Spurs and all other NBA teams needed to basically waive players on training camp deals or see if those players would get two-way deals or standard contracts. And so they did just that. The Spurs, they waived 3 players on training camp contracts, which were Adam Flagler, Micah Potter, and Stanley Umude. They also signed and waived James Banks III, Jamari Bouye, and Kyle Mangus, with Saturday being the last time that a team could sign a player, waive them, and then have them play with the G League team for this upcoming season. So basically, for those 6 players that were waived, they basically will have a chance of getting a bonus of $85,300 if they spend 60 days with the Spurs' affiliate G League team, which is the Austin Spurs this season. So as long as they're on the G League, Austin Spurs for 60 consecutive days, they will get a bonus of $85,000. Like I said, it wasn't too surprising that those players did get waived. I know Adam Flagler was the player who got the most rotation minutes early in the preseason before Dylan Harper and Stephon returned to the lineup. But then Flagler ended up getting injured, and so he missed those last few games against Indiana. Micah Potter and Stanley Umude, they basically only played in those fourth quarters once the Spurs' rotation players had been resting. So again, they never really quite got into the real rotation of those first 3 quarters of games. Bismack Biyombo was also on a training camp contract, but with the way the Spurs announced that he had been re-signed, it looked like he was going to make the roster, and so he sure enough did. So again, his deal initially was a training camp deal, but now it's going to be converted into a standard non-guaranteed contract for the veteran minimum. And basically, Biyombo will be on a non-guaranteed deal this coming season unless he stays on the roster past January 10th, 2026. But again, he's going to be on the roster. So here's how the Spurs' roster breaks down now. With 18 players. So they have 13 players on guaranteed deals. They have 2 players on non-guaranteed deals in Lindy Waters III, whose deal is partially guaranteed, and then Biyombo. And then they have 3 players on their 2-way contracts, which are David Jones-Garcia, Riley Minix, and Harrison Ingram. So again, a total of 18 players, which does meet the league requirements for the regular season that does begin on Tuesday. Well, technically the Spurs game is on Wednesday, but for all the other teams, for the opening season is going to be Tuesday. So again, that's the Spurs' regular season roster being set for opening night. All right, next up, let's look at this question is, who is going to be in the opening night rotation for the Spurs? So we know the answer to for a few of these questions, but there is one that we don't quite know. So let's kind of talk about these questions. So I have 3 questions here guiding us here. So first off, question is, who is out for opening night due to injury? And there's 3 players expected to be out for opening night, and that's De'Aaron Fox with the hamstring injury that he's rehabbing from. Jeremy Sohan, who last week sustained a new wrist injury in 5-on-5 workouts. So he was almost clear to play. He was participating in workouts, but then he got injured with the wrist injury. And then Lindy Waters III, he's going to have an eye procedure, so he's definitely going to be out for opening night as well. So again, those are the 3 players from the rotation who are going to be out for opening night in Dallas on Wednesday. Kelly Olynyk never played in the preseason. He was recovering from a heel injury, but all the reporting is that he should be ready to go for opening night. Kelly Olynyk should be ready to go. And then we saw Jordan McLaughlin, who was also injured, get into that final preseason game. So the next question is, who is definitely in the rotation? So based on the preseason, here are the players that always played in games whenever they were healthy. And so here's a likely starting lineup. Again, it's not confirmed just yet, but this is the likely starting lineup. It's Stephon at the point, Devin Vassell at the 2, Julian Champagnie at the 3, Harrison Barnes at the 4, and Victor Wembanyama at the 5. Again, that is the likely starting lineup for Wednesday in Dallas, unless there's any surprises from Coach Mitch Johnson to change it up, that lineup. And then there's 3 players who are going to for sure play off the bench, get minutes, and that's Dylan Harper, Keldon Johnson, and Luke Kornet. So again, those 3 players will get minutes. If the Spurs go to the Wemby Kornet lineup, then Wemby also gets some minutes there, with the bench unit as well, because we saw that in a lot of these preseason games, Coach Mitch Johnson definitely wanted to have Luke and Victor out there on the floor together. So I think we're going to see a lot of that this upcoming season. So Coach Johnson basically has 4 options that he might go with for that final spot if they want to go to a 9-man rotation, Spurs. So let's first talk about the different rotation outlooks that Coach Johnson could go with. So he could just stick with what he's done before in these preseason games, which is an 8-man rotation. Basically, the 5 starters I mentioned, plus Harper, Keldon, and Kornet, and then again mixing in some front court lineups with Wemby and Kornet, mixing in some backcourt lineups with Harper and Castle, which we saw in the preseason. So again, I think right now, if I just had to guess, I think that's the most likely option is he ends up just going with an 8-man rotation because it's opening night in Dallas. He probably wants the players who have been out there the most. So again, I think that's likely what he does. But again, we'll see. He has some other options here. He also has options with going with the 9-man rotation. So he could go with the 9-man rotation with rookie Carter Bryant off the bench. So Bryant would get some minutes off the bench with the other 8 players I mentioned. And so Coach Johnson did try some of these lineups a few times where he had Bryant out there, especially alongside Kornet and Wemby, so that Bryant's just in there for a few minutes, mainly for his defensive presence, bringing that his potential on that side of the ball. So that's one option, is to give rookie Carter Bryant some minutes early on in opening night. The other option is to go with Kelly Olynyk off the bench as part of a 9-man rotation. So here, Olynyk would play the backup power forward with the other 8 players that I mentioned. And again, he has participated in 5-on-5 practice, Kelly Olynyk, but again, he hasn't played in a preseason game. So this would be his first game, but he's a veteran. He knows how to get out there, even with new teammates. So would it be surprising if Coach Johnson instead goes with Kelly Olynyk in a 9-man rotation? Or the other choice is for Coach Johnson to go with Jordan McLaughlin. He kind of did this in the third quarter of that final game against the Pacers, where McLaughlin and McLaughlin and Dylan Harper will run the backcourt, off the bench, like they did Friday against Indiana. They could also play alongside Wemby and Kornet in this lineup, having Keldon play the power forward role, or someone like Julian Champagnie, or even having Devin Vassell out there. Coach Johnson could also just go 10 deep with having both McLaughlin and Carter Bryant out there. But again, if it had to be my guess right now, I do think he's just going to shorten the rotation just because it is the first game of the season. Maybe just go with an 8-man rotation of those 5 starters that I mentioned, plus Harper, Keldon, and Kornet, and of course mixing in the Wemby Kornet lineups and also the Harper Castle backcourt. So as far as these lineups, this could stretch beyond just opening night against Dallas. This could stretch into the Friday game against New Orleans and possibly the Sunday home opener against the Brooklyn Nets because, like I mentioned, Fox and Sohan, the Spurs haven't put out a timetable for their return, but they're expected to miss just a few games to start the regular season. And then Waters is expected to come back after Halloween, which would actually be the first 5 games of the season. So again, that's just kind of looking at who's going to definitely be in the rotation and then who might be in the rotation for opening night. Let's keep going. All right, so next, let's look at takeaways from the preseason now that the Spurs are done with their preseason schedule. So they ended up going undefeated 5-0 in the preseason. And I want to focus first on some data from the quarters when the rotation players played in the quarters, specifically when Victor Wembanyama was mainly out on the floor in those quarters. So overall, what I'm going to do for this sample size is I'm going to omit the data from the first game against the Guangzhou Lung Lions because, again, they're not going to be an NBA team that the Spurs are going to see this season. So I'm going to mainly focus on the other 4 games, which are the Miami Heat, the Utah Jazz, and then the Indiana Pacers, who the Spurs played twice. So in the first quarter, the Spurs came out pretty well when you average out their numbers. So they ended up winning first quarters by 5 points, 35-30. So again, good number offensively, scoring 35 points per on average in these quarters. Defensively, just barely getting to that 30-point mark. Maybe you want to keep that number a little bit lower for the regular season. In the second quarter, this is where the opponent started to make a little bit of a comeback. So the Spurs barely won this quarter, 32-30. So again, just +2, but again, that's a good sign that they're actually winning the quarter there. Defense kind of maintained, offense fell off just a little bit. And then in the third quarter, I'm only counting 3 of these games. I'm minusing the one against Utah because Victor didn't play in that second half against the Utah Jazz. So the Spurs, again, in their third quarters, it's almost like the first quarter. They came out very hot out of the gate, winning these quarters 32-26. So again, it's a smaller sample size, just 3 games. Again, so overall, in these 3 quarters that we're talking about here against these 4 teams, they ended up winning overall the average quarter by 4 points, 33-29. So again, that's a good sign. I know it's just preseason and we have to take multiple factors in here. We just really have to caution is that players on both the Spurs and other teams were in and out of lineups. For the Spurs, their data changed because then they slowly added Dylan Harper, then they slowly added Stephon Castle against someone like Utah. They were missing some key core players. Same thing for the Indiana Pacers were missing players, or they didn't sit. They sat their starters in the second half of a game. So again, it's just a good sign that yes, the Spurs went 5-0. And again, I'm not really looking at the fourth quarters. I know that the Spurs' bench played pretty well in some of those fourth quarters to maintain those leads and hold them. But again, a lot of those guys were on training camp deals or they're going to be in the G League. So again, I'm not focusing too much on how those players played. But for the players that are going to be on the floor every night for San Antonio, the rotation players, it's a good sign that they were winning these quarters at least early in the preseason. Again, it's just a 4-game sample size. So again, there is something to look at there with this some small amount of data that we saw. So next up, I'm gonna kind of go through how the players played. I'm not going to go too deep into stats because, again, it's just preseason data and all that data just goes by now. The real season's about to start here, so it's a new, fresh set of data. But I'm just going to talk about my overall observations of the players in their game. So Wemby, he looks ready to roll, as we saw. My question is, how much of a difference is his shot selection? Because we did see that he barely took threes. Only 2 threes per game is what he launched in the preseason. He took 8.8 shots per game, which is a very low volume. And again, he only played like about 20 minutes a night right now in these preseason games. And so I'm just wondering of how much of that creativity where he was putting the ball on the floor, creating for others, driving, operating in the post, playing near the rim more and getting offensive rebounds for putback dunks. How much of that is just the fact that for a few of these games, the Spurs were missing their lead ball handlers like Stephon and Dylan Harper, and especially De'Aaron Fox is still out, versus, is he really just moving away from the 3-point line and only like really being very selective with those shots? So again, that's something we're going to see next week when the real season begins. So, and of course, he's still incredible on defense. And of course, the ball movement that we saw here with his creativity, where he averaged 4 assists to 4.6 turnovers. As far as the turnovers, I looked at a lot of those turnovers, and some of them are going to be the correctable ones where it's more so on his decision-making about how to change that. Other parts of the turnovers were with how much he gets swarmed and how much some of the defenses sent double teams or triple teams toward his way. So again, Wemby had a good preseason. He's ready to roll for the regular season. Stephon only played in 2 games that we saw from him. He looked good on his drives when he was driving inside, finishing in the open court, of course, being a physical driver and drawing contact and getting to the free throw line. Also looked good in the way he was setting up teammates. I put some videos out on him on how he was finding Julian Champagnie in the corners, finding Wemby, finding Luke Kornet right under the rim. Again, his 3-point shot is going to be tested. And again, I don't know how much of an improvement he made this offseason. We're going to know that answer by data-wise. We won't know that answer till about, I'd say, like a 15 or 20 game mark of the season. We'll see both his accuracy, where that's at, his volume, and also, I'll have data on how much teams are leaving him wide open on purpose. Also, by the eye test, we'll get that picture pretty early when we watch these games, because we'll see how much defenders are backing off of him or if they're trying to stay closer to him at that 3-point line. So again, Stephon also looks ready to roll for the regular season. Keldon Johnson had a very efficient preseason scoring that basketball. So, especially finishing on his drives, I think he shot over 70%, overall from the floor. His 3-point shot looked good. He shot 50% again on a very low volume, just 2 attempts per game. And so that's my big question is, can he keep that up, in this likely bench role for him, being very efficient when he does attack the basket, finishing well, and then also how sustainable is his low volume 3-point shot. So that's a question for Keldon. But again, he looked like he had a good preseason in both as a starter and coming off the bench. Julian Champagnie had a great preseason, especially shooting the basketball. He was lights out from 3 on a high volume, so he ended up attempting 6 threes per game. He made 63% of those shots from outside, so he looks ready to roll. Whether he's likely going to start to begin the season while De'Aaron Fox is out, but then once Fox gets healthy, there's a chance Champagnie probably goes to the bench, or with Stephon continuing to start. Luke Kornet, obviously, he's there for his defense, which is one of the big keys why the Spurs signed him. But I think one of the big takeaways for me was how much of a weapon he can be on the offensive end and how much he becomes a problem for opposing defenses. We saw that, his ability to both corral those offensive rebounds was a problem for the defenses that were trying to stop him. Also, the way he rolls and the chemistry he's building with both Dylan Harper, with Stephon, and then he also and the way he's patient with his soft touch around the rim. And then also, he's going to be playing alongside Wemby in multiple quarters, as we saw so far during this preseason. So again, Kornet had a good preseason. Devin Vassell had a good preseason shooting the ball from inside within the arc. So mid-range, he had his mid-range shot going. He made some nice cuts and finished in the open court. His 3-point shot was a lot lower than I think his volume was a lot lower than I think he's going to get in the regular season. We'll see how much of that upticks with Castle, with Fox coming back soon, and then also playing in some lineups alongside Harper. His shot was his accuracy was off a bit, lower percentage, but again, I'm eager to see, does Vassell's accuracy get better during the season, and if not, how many games does the coaching staff go before maybe they look at an option like Julian Champagnie if that doesn't happen. But again, we'll kind of see with Vassell. Dylan Harper, the rookie, looked good in his first 2 games that he played out on the floor coming off the bench. And then the third game looked more like a rookie game. He still made some creative plays out there and found some good passing lanes, but also, forced some shots up against some contested defenses. So again, more so looked like a rookie kind of game. But I think that he's in the perfect role coming off the bench for the Spurs, especially that he's going to be in lineups playing alongside Luke Kornet, who sets really good screens for him and pick and roll. And then plus he's going to play in a lot of those Wemby Kornet lineups out there. So I think that, Harper's just in a good place right now heading into his first season with the role that the Spurs have him in. They're not asking too much from him. And again, I think that the big question for him, of course, will be his outside shot, how defenses will test him. Harrison Barnes had kind of like a similar preseason from last year where he really struggled from outside last year in the preseason. But then, of course, we saw in the regular season, he had it going and he ended up having the best shooting season on the team from outside. So, again, he only shot 22% from outside. I do think that shot will start to fall as we get into the regular season next week. So again, Barnes, he didn't play too many minutes out there for the Spurs, very likely to start again. And then finally, rookie Carter Bryant, again, I don't know if he'll be in the rotation to start on opening night, but from my takeaways from opening night or from the preseason is that, his offensive game is still coming along, kind of what we've known, but he might be ready for just limited minutes, especially on the defensive end where he can go out there, guard a specific assignment, especially Coach Johnson had him playing in a lot of those Wemby Kornet lineups, so he has some backup interior help there for him. And just for him, his job would just be to stop his man, make sure that player doesn't get by him. And if he needs to use some of his fouls with his sometimes over aggressive defense, at least he has that having a limited role. So again, those are just some of my initial my overall preseason takeaways for the players that are likely to be in the rotation for the Spurs, and also just looking at some of the data. But again, you can't put too much into it because it was the preseason. All right, so before I close this episode, let's go through some news and notes. This past week, the Spurs exercised team options for the 26-27 season for both Wemby and Stephon Castle. This is basically just more of a formality that the team has to do. They had to make this decision by October 31st. Obviously, that was a very easy decision for them, saying, yeah, we want Victor back on the team next year and also Stephon Castle. So again, that was just more of a formality they had to do. But the interesting date to watch here this coming week will be Monday, October 20th at 5 p.m. Central Time, because that is now the deadline for both Jeremy Sohan and the Spurs to agree on a contract extension and get that deal signed. If they want to, agree on an extension, they would have to do it by 5 p.m. on Monday. If not, Sohan will become a restricted free agent next summer. So again, Monday is going to be a big day to see, whether or not Sohan's going to be on the team. Or at least have his deal for multiple years extended. If you have a chance, make sure to visit thespotupshot.com. I've got some features up there right now, really a film breakdown. So the first one's called The Rundown, Spurs, waive Flagler, Potter, and Umude, plus film breakdown versus Pacers. If you want to check that out, where I went through some clips on Stephon Castle's passing, his scoring, Wemby's operating in the post, Wemby's defense, Luke Kornet crashing the offensive glass, Dylan Harper being crafty. I also did another film breakdown on the Spurs' first game against Indiana back on Monday. So again, you can check that out with similar kind of clips where I really break them down, some of these plays, and kind of just go through the actions that the Spurs are using. And I'll be doing some of these kind of breakdowns throughout the season, after the day after games, as well as throwing in the stats that I dig up. And then lastly, the upcoming games before the next episode. So my plan is to record next Sunday after the Spurs' game against the Brooklyn Nets, because that is an afternoon tip-off. It's an early game. So again, my goal is to get the next pod up by next Sunday. So before then, the Spurs will play 3 games. So they're going to play Wednesday in Dallas to open the season. The Mavericks are favored by 2.5 in this opening game. Then on Friday, the Spurs are going to play in New Orleans on the road. And then on Sunday, game 3, the Spurs will host the Brooklyn Nets for their season opener. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.